We're going to go ahead and look at the biological recovery of Mount St. Helens this morning. And I've heard that Mount St. Helens is only about, 9 miles away from here. And so we're going to be talking in the shadow of Mount St. Helens this morning. So let's go ahead and look at that this morning. Before the eruption, Mount St. Helens was a sportsman's paradise. And it was just a wonderful place to do hunting and fishing. And so this is what it looked like prior to the explosion in 1980. And you can see Spirit Lake right in the center there. That's 6 miles from the summit of Mount St. Helens. And Spirit Lake has a lot to do with the biological recovery of Mount St. Helens and just all of the processes that occurred both in biology and geology. Skushna, but anyway, I like Yadlublu biology. So anyway, I was a city firefighter in the state of Colorado when Mount St. Helens blew up May 18th of 1980, and I was on duty at that time, and we were at the station and we watched Mount St. Helens blow up on television there, and at the fire station, and let's see. And that's pretty skushna as well. Okay, but that's what I was doing in 1980. Here we have a diagram of volcanoes that have occurred in what we would call after the Genesis flood, post-flood. And so all of these are post-flood volcanoes. Can you see that the first three there are very, very big Bolshoi volcanoes there at Yellowstone National Park? Look at the bottom of the screen there. Do you see that little malinky Mount St. Helens? Just very, very tiny. And you would think, wow, very small volcano. What would it do? But small volcano or not, it was quite significant here in the United States. It was the most destructive volcano in the history of the United States. So we see in May 18th, 1980, the Mount St. Helens blew up, releasing 400 million tons of TNT. That's how much energy was liberated at Mount St. Helens. That's equivalent to 20,000 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs. So there was a lot of energy that was liberated there at Mount St. Helens. It also destroyed over 230 square miles of forest. So that is just a lot of energy, a lot of destruction that occurred at Mount St. Helens in 1980. And of course, our dear friend, Colonel Jeff Williams, took this picture from the International Space Station, and I think that's a perfect picture of Mount St. Helens, hundreds of miles up in the sky there. And we ate at Colonel Williams' house, Colonel and Mrs. Williams' house, just a few nights ago, and just had a wonderful time. So what I want to do this morning very quickly is read from Genesis chapter 7 and just read to you, because this is a very, very significant passage of Scripture when it comes to the Mount St. Helens explosion. You follow along as I read, please. "And the waters prevailed so mightily in the earth, and that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep." Verse 21. "And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and," look at this, "all mankind." Verse 22. "Everything on the dry land in whose the nostril, the breath of life, died." So that's very, very significant when we look at Mount St. Helens explosion, which was really an event that we would call a sterilization event at Mount St. Helens when it exploded in 1980. That area looked like a lunar landscape. It looked like a thermonuclear blast zone. 60 square kilometers, area, leaving a gray-looking lunar landscape devoid of plants and animals. It may remind you of the scripture that we just read in Genesis chapter 7 and what happened, how devastated the earth was. And so when Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, it destroyed every living thing around it. Gas, ash, and rock heated to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit at 60 square kilometers. Well, After the flood of Genesis, when the ark landed in the mountains of Ararat, Noah and his family must have looked out at this wasteland, and they must have wondered, when they seen this barren post-flood environment, how long would it remain that way? How long would this devastated area that was just emaciated by the Genesis flood occur? You know, more than a few scientists wanted to know how long it would take for Mount St Helens to recover from this devastation. And again, that's why we're looking at Mount St Helens. We believe, as creation scientists, that Mount St Helens provides a lot of answers to questions we have when it comes to a post-flood recovery. So, why does Mount St Helens matter? I think it is simply because we can use creation science to explain how the world recovered after the Genesis flood. Mount St Helens has impacted many areas of science, especially ecology, and recovery by the plants and animals in the devastated area around the volcano occurred, and this is key, ladies and gentlemen, occurred very quickly. It was a rapid recovery of the environment. Many centuries aren't required to turn a lifeless terrain into a lush biota. Plant and animal repopulation was and is remarkably fast. The critics of creation say, boy, if there was a worldwide flood that destroyed the world, it would take a millennia. It would just take an incredible long time for the area to recover, the world to recover. And that simply was not the case. So, does Mount St. Helens recovery have implications for the worldwide flood recorded in Genesis? And the answer is, yes, it does. Yes, it does. So, after a natural disaster, creation scientists observe environmental recovery processes, and then we extrapolate. Maybe you've heard that word, as you extrapolate to the worldwide reclamation after the Genesis flood. So Mount St. Helens continues to be a scale model of a world that God destroyed and recovered as a result of his judgment. Remember what Scripture says in the early chapters of Genesis? That the world was filled with violence. The world was filled with violence, and God sent a flood, didn't he? And that's why the Institute for Creation Research for years would visit Grand Canyon in northern Arizona, because we could see that Grand Canyon was formed by a lot of water over a short period of time. Grand Canyon was formed by a lot of water over a short period of time. And as we look at Grand Canyon, we are sobered as Christians, realizing that what we are seeing is physical evidence of God's judgment on a world that was filled with violence. So in the decades since the eruption, Mount St. Helens has given scientists, look at this, an unprecedented opportunity to witness the intricate steps through which life reclaims a devastated landscape. So again, let's use the word extrapolate. Can we extrapolate from what we see at Mount St. Helens to possibly what Noah and his family saw after the Genesis flood as they were at Mount Ararat? Can we say something like this, just like the quote we saw above there? In the decades since the Genesis flood, 4,500 years ago, Noah and his family had an unprecedented opportunity to witness the intricate steps through which life reclaims a devastated landscape. So I think as a scientist this morning, we can extrapolate to the devastation that we see at Mount St. Helens and possibly explain how things were recovered and reclaimed after the Genesis flood. So the recovery of Mount St. Helens area was a wonderful living laboratory. And that's what creation scientists say too, a wonderful living laboratory to investigate how ecosystems and species respond to and recover from major disturbances. And this was said by a research ecologist, guess where? Right there, Amboy, Washington. Okay, so it's kind of interesting that this research has been conducted right here in this neighborhood. The natural experiment gave scientists plenty of surprises and revealed some important factors that influence how an ecosystem recovers from such widespread devastation. Think again of what we read in Genesis chapter 7, and then how a ecosystem recovers from such widespread devastation, which they used to study other areas impacted by volcanic eruptions. And this was said by a secular evolutionary source. But we can see the comparison between Mount St. Helens recovery and the recovery of the world after the Genesis flood. So here's a question this morning. Are there any examples of rapid recovery in a destroyed ecosystem? In other words, can we go around the world and see areas that have rapidly recovered from destruction and devastation, and perhaps draw some conclusions there? And of course, there's rapid recovery, once again, right here in the great state of Washington. A website said the response of the ecosystem was incredible and faster than some experts expected. One ecologist at Ohio State watched the reservoir beds here in Washington State that looked like moonscapes. Moonscapes, well, that might remind you of how it was described there at Mount St. Helens. It looked like a lunar landscape, how devastated it was, but how quickly Mount St. Helens has recovered. It's recovered, and it says here in the quote, to vibrant, rich habitat, and cascades emerged where none had been, at least for the last century. The key word, ladies and gentlemen, is when it comes to recovery of the ecosystem, whether it's here in Washington, the research that they did, or at Mount St. Helens, the key word is rapid. It's rapid. It doesn't take impossibly long periods of time. And so that's what we're seeing as creation scientists. This is something that my friend David Coppage said. He's a fellow creation scientist. He said that today songbirds sing in the trees, river dippers hunt in the waters, salmon are well on the road to recovery. That must have been shocking to geologists accustomed to thinking of slow and gradual change over the supposed millions and millions of years. The areas previously depleted of salmon are on a fast track to recovery in a shorter time than he ever expected after the removal of this dam that was discussed in Science Daily just a few years ago. So again, the Washington River system, right here in the state of Washington, recovered quickly. And we see that, ladies and gentlemen, over and over again. And yes, we can make an extrapolation to how the world recovered after the Genesis flood. One of my favorite examples is right here, the island of Surtsey, coming up out of the water in the North Atlantic Ocean, just off the coast of Iceland. And I remember as a little kid, I was a little kid back then, and reading about that and being fascinated about how fast that occurred. Surtsey is a good example of a mature and varied landscape that developed in look at that, just what? Just a few months. Just a few months following the island's volcanic formation in the Atlantic Ocean in 1963. And so it was very rapid. And so scientists, ecologists, geologists, all sorts of scientists have been studying the appearance of the island of Surtsey. A life scientist who studied it stated in 2008, Surtsey always provides surprises. Какое surprise? We discover about 20 new species of life forms each year. That's amazing, folks. That's incredible that you would have such a rapid recovery of a place that was simply a sterile rock that came up out of the water, and all of a sudden now it's vibrant in its development. And it doesn't take an impossibly long period of time. It doesn't take hundreds of thousands or millions of years. There is what we call biological succession at Mount St. Helens, just like the biological succession we see at the island of Surtsey, going from the quote-unquote simple life to more sophisticated, more complex life as time goes on. And so we see that at Surtsey, and it's been well documented by scientists, but we also see it here at Mount St. Helens. rapid succession, rapid development of an area that was 60-kilometer area, square area, that was devastated by the Mount St. Helens volcano. Together, about 60 plant species, including mosses, lichens, and evergreen shrubs, have been established since island of Surtsey formed. Its rapidly growing ecosystem is powerful evidence against critics who claim that Earth could not possibly have recovered from a worldwide flood that happened only thousands of years ago. And so this is why Surtsey matters. This is why I get so excited studying the island of Surtsey, because a lot can happen in biology and ecology and the environment in a short period of time. Well, that brings us to something that happened in 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico. Maybe you remember it. It was the Deepwater Horizon oil well blowout. And it was a very tragic situation because a number of individuals died in that. It was a very dangerous situation to begin with. But when the Deepwater Horizon oil well blew out, it released a large plume of raw oil into the Gulf of Mexico. Scientists were very apocalyptic. They said this is going to destroy the environment and the surrounding environment of the Gulf of Mexico. And certainly fishing areas were devastated by that. I don't want to detract from that. There was a number of businesses, fishing businesses, that didn't make it. But the prediction by a lot of scientists were that it's going to take centuries and centuries for this raw oil, this hydrocarbon, to get cleaned up in the environment, if it ever did, they would say. And meanwhile, the whole of the Gulf of Mexico would become something like a desert, as it were, that life would not proliferate there. Well, something happened that nobody counted on, and that is a team of American scientists have shown that in just a month or so after the incident, the Deepwater Horizon blowout, a microscopic cleanup crew, this is called Alkanovorax. Alkanovorax is the genus name of a bacterium that eats up oil. This is a bacterial species that God has created in the beginning that is designed to eat oil. Who would have guessed? And so they already started to, as it says here in the quote by this evolutionist, digest the mess. So after this oil came up and it engulfed the Gulf of Mexico, as it were, these tiny bacterial cells, Alkanovorax, began to clean up. Now, how effective was it? Well, as it says here, that God designed this particular species of bacteria to munch on hydrocarbons, on oil. They found that this species of bacteria had dined for eons on oil seeping naturally through the seafloor. It proliferated in the cloud of oil that drifted underwater for months after the Deepwater Horizon oil rig accident in 2010. So these species of bacteria that have always been there, that have been a cleanup crew at the bottom of the ocean eating up oil that would naturally seep up from the seafloor, now got busy and began to consume the oil in the Gulf of Mexico. They not only outcompeted fellow microbes, they each ramped up their own internal metabolic machinery to digest the oil as efficiently as possible. You know what? God has everything under control, doesn't he? And sometimes we don't feel that way. But again, we go back to the scientists who were very apocalyptic, who said that the whole area of the Gulf of Mexico was devastated by oil and would never recover. Look what happened. We see that these bacterial cells began to eat the oil very efficiently. The result was a nature-made cleanup crew capable of reducing the amount of oil in the undersea plume by about half, look at this, by about half every 3 days. Does that sound rapid? It certainly sounds rapid to me. And so today, in the 21st century, in 2021, we find that for the most part, the Gulf of Mexico is amazingly clean for this blowout of the oil well in 2010. Certainly there are exceptions, but it is amazing how it has recovered. Now, I think maybe we can give an example in terms of the age of the earth when we look at oil and the fact that there are bacteria designed by God to eat oil. Let me show you what I mean. We have oil reserves underground, and they are sealed oil reserves. Remember that God has created bacteria that eat oil. Remember also that the theory of evolution says that the oil reserves that you see underground are allegedly millions and millions of years old. That kind of time would more than allow this oil-eating bacteria to get into those reserves and do what? Soup's on. Start eating that. I mean, look at that. Boy, I tell you what, you can almost hear them licking their chops. And so you have this bacteria here that could get in there, but if the earth is as young as creation science says, only thousands of years old, then these oil reserves remain untouched. But it's a real problem for evolution to explain how is it that these oil reserves could exist all that time. Remember how dynamic the crust of the earth is. We have earthquakes, we have tectonic plates that are shifting, we have tsunamis, we have all sorts of things that are going on just in our lifetime. Just in our lifetime. But the evolutionists say these oil reserves are many, many millions of years old, and yet they're pristine. They're untouched by this oil-eating bacteria. It's something I think we should keep in mind. How can we say that it remains sterile, and this oil would have to remain sterile, right? Yeah, for many millions of years. Well, let's bring it to COVID-19. Who can ever talk about science anymore without mentioning COVID-19? How quickly animals are rewilding. I don't know how the translators will do on that, but that's a word I've never heard before, rewilding. I guess that just means where the wild animals come back in. Our urban spaces is pretty encouraging, according to an individual there that talked about that just last year. And so we find as people have retreated into their homes and have stayed in their homes, all of the wild animals are going, where is everybody? And they began to move in and fill towns and villages and streets. And so this is a common sight in a lot of areas there as these animals want to reclaim, which was, they say, rightfully theirs. Okay, I'm being funny. But anyway, I think that's kind of interesting what the COVID-19 thing has done, situation, and shows how the animals can quickly move in and fill areas that everybody thought they would never come back to. So when we talk about rapid biological recovery at Mount St. Helens, this is what we see. Mount St. Helens before the explosion, Mount St. Helens after the explosion, but how quickly after the explosion it has recovered, a lot faster than a lot of scientists have predicted. So it's been over 40 years, 4 decades since the eruption of Mount St. Helens. It has given ecologists an extraordinary opportunity to witness the steps through which the biological environment has reclaimed a devastated landscape. So, was the Mount St. Helens a wasteland forever, as many scientists were saying? Mount St. Helens was devastated. It was sterilized. It's a lunar landscape, a thermonuclear blast zone. Nothing could survive, they said. It seemed as though Mount St. Helens might remain a wasteland forever, according to NOVA, a program that is not sympathetic to Christians or creationists. A wasteland forever. Then, to everybody's surprise, life began to bloom again. And so this is a lupine, and a lupine is a very, very special kind of plant that God has designed in order to help to move in and fill and reestablish a population of plants followed by animals. So the lupine is very important because it's what we call in biology a legume. Now, I won't get into too much biology this morning, but legumes are very, very important because they take atmospheric nitrogen and help to process it and to make food sources from that. But it takes a specialized bacteria that these legumes have in their roots in order to accomplish that. So legumes are very important as a devastated environment gets on the road to recovery. And who doesn't like strawberries? While not one of the most ecologically notable returns, the spring fruit always amazes a volcanologist, somebody who studies volcanoes, not Vulcans, who said, the most gorgeous volcano in the world, so entrenched in our story of the Pacific Northwest, and it erupts tiny strawberries we can eat. So I just thought I'd go ahead and throw that in there because it's kind of interesting. So we find that the flora and the fauna, that is, the plants and the animals, have more than returned to the zone of destruction. According to a secular source way back in the year 2020, he is saying that this area has recovered rapidly, very rapidly. And he said, as a matter of fact, they're thriving. They're thriving, and he said that just last year. Well, I'm no photographer, but I took this picture about 20 years ago when I was in the Mount St. Helens area, right in this area, and I was driving a rental car, and I got out to take a picture of this sign that says, planted in 1985. And I thought, this really is incredible. Now, this was 20 years ago when I took this picture, so we can see the status of the plants of the devastated area of Mount St. Helens back then. And so I think it's very significant that the recovery rate of Mount St. Helens has been so rapid. Well, let's not forget the frogs. Everybody loves frogs, right? When you study biology, some people enjoy frogs. Well, nobody enjoys frogs. But anyway, it's a really kind of an interesting area because biologists were surprised to find that most of the area's amphibian species, like frogs, had survived the blast. The eruption created an array of 150 ponds that actually encouraged the amphibians to widen their territory. And so that's kind of interesting with the amphibians, the frogs. We also have the mountain goats. Though the blast decimated the area's herd, which wasn't particularly large to begin with, the alpine ungulates are now a common sight to hikers and are plentiful. So the recovery of Mount St. Helens, ladies and gentlemen, was fast. It was rapid. And I think as a zoologist this morning, we can extrapolate and say, maybe that kind of recovery, that speed of the recovery of the environment, the ecosystem, also happened in the world after the Genesis flood. Well, we have elk that moved in and filled the Mount St. Helens blast zone literally months to years right after it blew up. A fast replenishment and recovery of the Mount St. Helens area, and we found that elk populations reached several hundred animals within 5 years of the 1980 eruption. Fast, rapid, quick. So let's conclude. What we find is that Mount St. Helens is a scale model of the world that God destroyed and reformed as a result of the Noah's flood. Furthermore, it provides 40 years of scientific evidence that supports catastrophism and refutes this strange idea that evolutionists have, something called uniformitarianism. All that means is a slow, gradual, step-by-step process that goes from hundreds of thousands to many, many millions of years. And so we do not subscribe to that at ICR. We believe we're living on a young earth, and therefore we do not subscribe to uniformitarianism. So this is a wonderful living laboratory of how quickly, as I say, the environment can respond to devastation, extreme devastation like we saw at Mount St. Helens. And we can extrapolate that and perhaps apply that to the world right after the Genesis flood. Well, we have some books available in the book table back there, and I hope I'm still on time and tracking. But we have, not surprisingly, a DVD on Mount St. Helens. So if you're interested in Mount St. Helens, if you want to build up your creation science library, get the DVD entitled Mount St. Helens. If you're a Sunday school teacher, if you're a homeschool parent, this would be an excellent DVD to have for the kids and see about this outdoor living laboratory, the Mount St. Helens Recovery. We have Creation Basics and Beyond. This does not have any pictures at all. Okay, so this is simply a book that will help you to know why you believe, what you believe when it comes to creation science. There's a number of students out here, and as perhaps they go to senior high school or junior college or maybe even graduate school in science, you want to get this book, Creation Basics and Beyond. All sorts of articles regarding creation science written by a number of ICR scientists, and it answers a lot of questions you have. What about radiometric dating, for example? What about some of these other questions that people have when it comes to science and the Bible? What do we say at ICR? We say that science and the Bible go together like politics and corruption, okay? They're inseparable. And so you want to get this book, Creation Basics and Beyond. Speaking of Mount St. Helens again, we have a book called Footprints in Ash by John Morris, a dear friend of mine. John Morris has written this book, Footprints in Ash, where they talk about investigating, researching, going through Mount St. Helens right after the explosion and some of the conclusions that they have come to. So this is a book that goes together with the DVD I just mentioned, Mount St. Helens. So you buy this as the DVD and the book, the Mount St. Helens and the Footprints in Ash book there. And then finally, some guy named Sherwin has written a book called The Ocean Book. This has been revised, expanded, and updated. This is something that you would enjoy reading to your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, or just your pretty good grandkids, okay? Thank you. And so this is a book that I think you'll enjoy very much. Lots of pictures and lots of questions that are answered regarding the ocean. For example, how much of this planet is covered by water? Well, about 74%. What's the average depth of the ocean? 2.5 miles. And so there's a lot of information in this book, the Ocean Book, that you will enjoy reading and also sharing with others as well. Now, if I know the guys there, you know, the wife is probably telling the guys, look, you're just going to get one book. We don't want you to buy out the book table. Just get one book, and that's all. Okay, and I've been married over 40 years, so I know what that's like. So I guess if I had a choice to which book I would get at the book table there, from what I just shared with you, I would get these 4 right here, okay? So get these 4, and you'll be all set. All right.